My son said loudly at dinner, "You're a loser. Mom's new husband isn't." I did say anything. The fork never made it to my mouth. I remember the way it hovered there, loaded with mashed potatoes, steam softening into the air, while my son's words ricocheted through the dining room like a glass shattering in slow motion. "You're a loser," he said, his voice cracking from the force of it. "Mom's new husband is." And then the silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just sit in the room but grows roots under your skin. I could hear the refrigerator hum. I could hear the cheap clock on the wall counting my humiliation. Tick, tick, tick. And I could feel my 12-year-old son staring at me, waiting to see what I'd do with the words he'd just thrown like stones. I didn't say anything. Not because I was noble, not because I had some zen-like control over my emotions, but because for a second, or maybe longer, I forgot how to breathe. My name is Daniel, and I am the father who didn't fight back. I used to think pain was loud, like a door slamming or a plate breaking or a scream splitting the air. But pain, real pain, turns you into a ghost in your own kitchen, sitting at a second-hand table with a child who looks like you but suddenly feels a million miles away. The mashed potatoes slid off my fork and back onto the plate. My chair scraped the tile when I stood up, and my son, my boy, Liam, kept staring at me with a defiant kind of anger that didn't belong on a 12-year-old's face. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where did you learn to say that? Why do you believe it? How long have you been carrying this around? But my throat locked shut. Instead, I walked to the sink, placed my plate there, and said the only words I could manage. "Dinner over, do your homework." This isn't where the story starts, of course. It started 2 years earlier when my marriage ended with the quiet finality of a door closing behind you in a house you used to call home. My ex-wife Marion and I were broken in a way neither of us could fix. There were arguments, tears, a slow erosion of kindness, and at the end of it there was Liam, standing in the middle like a lone tree in a field being fought over by 2 storms. We did our best with shared custody. I got Liam 3 evenings a week and every other weekend. I learned to cook simple meals. I Googled fun things to do with a preteen boy. At 2 a.m. I said things like, "You can talk to me about anything," even when I wasn't sure he believed it. Then Marion remarried. His name was Eric, corporate job, nice car, confident handshake, a man who looked like he'd never questioned whether he belonged in a room. I pretended it didn't bother me. I even shook his hand and smiled like a gentleman in a movie who loses the girl but keeps his dignity. But kids are emotional barometers. They feel the shifts long before the clouds gather, and somewhere along the way, Liam began to compare. I just didn't know how deeply. Not until the mashed potatoes night. He slammed his bedroom door after homework, loud enough to say he didn't regret what he'd said. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my reflection staring back at me like a stranger. My job at the hardware store had cut my hours. I drove an old car that needed more repairs than I could afford. The couch springs squeaked when I moved. My apartment smelled faintly of old carpet no matter how much I cleaned. Maybe he was right. Maybe in the simplest, ugliest terms, his world had 2 men, one shiny and successful and me. And what had I done? I'd stood there silent like a loser would. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake listening to the sound of my son shifting in the next room, the wall between us suddenly feeling like a continent. The next morning, he avoided my eyes. We drove to school in near silence, the radio filling the space conversational bravery should have occupied. Before he got out, I finally said, "We'll talk tonight." He shrugged, already halfway gone. But that day, as I stocked shelves and cut keys and mixed paint for customers who didn't know they were looking at a loser, a different thought began to form. He's hurting too. Kids lash out because they don't know how else to say, "I'm confused, I'm angry. I'm scared that loving one parent means betraying the other. And by the time my shift ended, I wasn't angry anymore. I was afraid of losing him. That night I cooked his favorite, spaghetti, too much cheese, garlic bread that leaves crumbs everywhere. He came to the table slowly, like he expected a battle. We ate in silence for a while. Then I put my fork down. "Liam," I said softly, "about last night." He stiffened. "I'm not going to yell," I said, "but I need to understand. Why did you say that?" He stared at his plate. His jaw clenched. His eyes shimmered, and for a moment I saw my little boy, the one who used to run into my arms when he scraped his knee, buried under the adolescent armor. "Because it's true," he muttered. "What makes you think that?" He hesitated, then everything spilled out in bursts. "You live in this tiny place. Your car is junk. You never take me on vacations. You work all the time and still don't have money. Mom and Eric go to restaurants and trips and stuff. He bought me a bike. He listens when I talk about robotics. He's not stuck." The word stuck hit me harder than loser. "Are you embarrassed of me?" I asked quietly. Silence. His shoulders trembled. And then, barely above a whisper, "Sometimes." I had to look away, not because I was angry, because I was breaking. But he kept going, voice cracking like thin ice. "And I hate myself for feeling that way. But when Mom talks about him, she smiles like she never did with you. And I don't know where I fit. He seems like a winner. And you." He stopped. I finished the sentence for him in my head. "And you don't." I took a long breath. I didn't rush. For the first time, I chose not to defend myself, not to argue, not to bleed pride onto the table. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "That was brave." He looked shocked. Maybe he expected me to lash out, to confirm his worst fears. "Liam, can I tell you something?" I continued. "Not as your dad, but as a man who's made mistakes." He nodded, eyes bright. "I am stuck sometimes," I said. "I don't have everything figured out. The divorce was hard. Money is tight. I get scared. I feel small. And yeah, sometimes I feel like a loser too." His head snapped up. "But," I added gently, "being a loser isn't about money, or cars, or trips. It's about whether you give up. And I haven't. I go to work. I pay rent. I show up. I make dinner. I try to be there for you every single day I'm allowed to be." My voice wavered. "And when you called me a loser, that hurt. Not because you were wrong about my struggles, but because the person whose opinion means the most to me looked at me and only saw what I don't have." A tear slid down his cheek. "I didn't mean." "I know," I said, "but we need to understand each other. Eric can be a good man and a positive part of your life. I don't want to compete with him. I just want to be your dad." He covered his face with his hands. "I don't know how to choose." My heart cracked. "You don't have to," I whispered. "Loving him doesn't mean loving me less, and loving me doesn't mean betraying him. There is room in your life for both." He sobbed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the kind of soft, broken sound that comes from holding too much inside. I moved to the chair beside him and wrapped my arms around him, awkwardly at first, then tightly, like I was afraid if I let go, he'd slip away forever. "I'm sorry," he said into my shirt. "I was so mad. Everyone keeps telling me how great Eric is, and I feel like if I like him, I'm replacing you." I rested my chin on his head. "I will always be your dad," I said. "No one replaces that, not ever." We stayed like that for a long time. Healing didn't happen overnight. There were still moments of tension, still comparisons, still pangs of insecurity when Liam talked about things he did with Eric. But something had changed. We talked more. We listened harder. We allowed the hard feelings to exist instead of pretending they weren't there. One Sunday, weeks later, Liam and I worked on my old car together, grease on our hands, sun warming the driveway. He told me about a robotics competition. I told him about the first car I ever owned. He laughed. Not the guarded, half-polite laugh. The real one, the one I'd missed. And then he said, almost offhand, "You know Eric's cool, but you're my dad." That was enough. More than enough. Years later, after promotions, after therapy, after the slow but steady rebuilding of my life, Liam told me something I'll never forget. "Dad," he said, "you taught me that strength isn't about winning. It's about staying. You stayed." And I realized something too. That night at the dinner table when I didn't say anything, not because I was noble, but because I was shattered, that was the moment I could have lost my son. But choosing patience over pride, honesty over ego, love over the need to be right, that's what saved us. Moral of the story: true worth isn't measured by wealth, status, or comparison to others. It's measured by character, the willingness to stay, to try, to listen, and to love even when it hurts. And sometimes, the greatest strength a parent can show is choosing understanding over anger, so a child learns that love doesn't require choosing sides.